On MIFA.org, this whole presentation is on there. You should have all just grabbed, just a small little booklet is what they give now. Many years ago, we used to have the whole presentation. But if you want the presentation, it is on their website and you can get that. So this is kind of, you know, I joke that every year they kind of change it up, and last year they added this slide like, you can do this. And it is a little goofy, but at the same time, it's absolutely true. It's completely can be overwhelming, whether you're going through it for the first time or the second time, but you can do it, and that's part of the message here, as well as I'll give you resources for help after this presentation should you need it. So there is support and there is help out there for you after you're done with this presentation when you're really sitting down and kind of filling out forms and going through the process. So what we're going to talk about is the types and sources of financial aid that are available, the application process, the different forms that you may or may not need to fill out, how actual financial aid decisions are made. We'll look at some sample financial aid awards as well. Then talking a little bit about then paying for college, and as I stated, the free resources that are available to all of you. And sometimes I've had questions at the end of a presentation from parents saying, my child is, because this is a Massachusetts company, oh, my child's going to school out of state. Everything that I'm talking about is for, you know, any college that's in the United States. So just want to put that out there in the beginning. So what is financial aid? Basically, it is money available for students to pay for college. The three main types of financial aid are grants and scholarships, and that is gift aid. And we'll talk a little bit about the distinction between merit-based and need-based aid. Then there is work study that is available, and that is really money that is allotted from the government to schools, and it supplements a student's wages when they have a job. So the student kind of looks as a good candidate to it might be, like for instance, at our school, our libraries use a lot of work study students. They only have to pay up to maybe 25% of the student's wages, where work study covers the rest. So to the employer, that's a great benefit. The student doesn't see any difference. It's just everything's kind of done in the background, but they would receive that in an award letter if they're eligible for work study funding. And then there are student loans available as well. So that's money that is borrowed and then is paid back later on. So merit-based aid is given for some sort of reason, whether it's academic, athletic, you know, someone's a super oboe player and a school wants that oboe player. There's some sort of reason that the student is awarded that aid. It may or may not be renewable. It should be clearly stated on any award letter that a student receives, you know, whether or not it's renewable, and additionally, if there's any stipulation to keep that award. For instance, you know, if it's an academic award, the student may need to maintain a certain GPA in order to receive the award in the next year or the next semester or whatever it is. If you had any questions from a school awarding that type of aid, you know, absolutely, and I'll say this throughout the presentation, you know, be in touch with the financial aid office, reach out to them, talk to them if you have questions. And it's not offered at all schools, merit aid, and so that's additionally something that is good to do, is to look into what sorts of financial aid is available at different schools that the student may be applying to, because it's not standard, except for federal and state aid, but as far as institutional aid and such. So need-based aid obviously is based on need, so it's looking at income and assets. The majority of aid is based on need. All federal aid and state aid is based on financial need. This second bullet point, I always like to just talk about that a little bit, because this slide is generically talking about need-based aid, and it says eligibility determined by a standardized formula. I just like to point out, as far as the federal aid is concerned, it absolutely is the same formula when you fill out, and we'll talk about it, the FAFSA form. it determines the same amount of eligibility for any school for federal aid. Institutions that have their own funds to award may use a different form, may use a slightly different formula. The way we look at it at our school, it's actually a more generous formula. So you may see differences in an estimated family contribution, which we'll talk about, which may seem to you as if there's differences in formulas. There is when schools award their own institutional funds. I just kind of like to point that out. But as far as the federal aid, the state aid, it is a standard formula. And students also, in order to keep their aid, particularly for federal and state aid, they have to maintain what's called satisfactory academic progress. Typically, it's by sophomore year, you at least have to have a C average. And so that is a component of that as well. So where does this financial aid come from? I've been referencing a little bit with federal aid and institutional aid. So the federal government does have some grants available. Often you hear about the federal Pell Grant in the news because there are appropriations that go towards that. That is for the neediest families. And often people will say, oh, well, is there an income cutoff? How is the federal Pell Grant determined? I recently was reading a statistic that said 70% of students who are receiving a Pell Grant come from family incomes of $40,000 or less. So that at least gives you some sort of an idea of who's eligible for the Pell Grant. And it's a grant of up to $5,700 at the highest cost of attendance schools. They have the work study funding available. That is allotted to schools. And so it is also possible that a student could have a work study allotment given to them on an award letter at one school and not at another, because it's not based on the student's level of need, but it's based on the amount of money that the school itself gets, and then they distribute amongst their population of students. The federal government has student loans that are available. You know, for most students, particularly going right into college, who probably don't have much of a credit history, if any at all, you know, these loans are given to students as long as a student is eligible for subsidized aid, which as long as they're basically eligible for aid, it's a subsidized loan, meaning that the interest does not accrue while the student is enrolled in school. And typically they go into repayment after they graduate. The only caveat to that is, you know, if a student actually withdrew and took a period of time off, let's say they took a year off, they would go into repayment on the loan. If they go back to school, they can defer those loans. They're not having to make payment, not having interest accrue. There also are some tax incentives. So for parents, if you're claiming your child as a dependent on your tax return, the money that you're paying towards tuition, I believe it's up to $2,000 as a tax credit, is available. And then in paying student loan interest, once that is being paid, there's a credit for that as well. The state of Massachusetts has a few programs. Yes?
You mentioned that interest doesn't start accruing until you leave school. Does that include if a student goes directly into a master's program, will interest start accruing or not? Sure,
I'm just going to repeat the question so everyone can hear. So it was, I had said that most of the loans, they're not accruing interest, the student loans, and that how does that transcend to going on to right into graduate school? Going on to further study at graduate school, as long as it's like within the United States, you can defer your loans for graduate school. So yes, and that would, you know, prevent the interest from accruing, and you don't have to make payments, although you can make payments if you want to, and there's no penalties for doing so. Sure. So the state of Massachusetts, they have a similar program to the Pell Grant program, but the highest amount that a student can receive in a year is about $2,500, but it's very similar to the qualifications to receiving the Pell Grant. There's a very, very small loan program that they have. It's allotted to schools, so each school has a different amount. I just know at our school we have about $30,000 that we can award to students. It's a zero interest loan. But that's not a lot, so I like to kind of put that out there. I don't know what other schools receive, but I know that the state has a limited pot of money. And then there's some scholarships and tuition waivers. Your application for any Massachusetts state funding is the same as for the federal funds, which is the FAFSA form, which we will talk about in just a minute. So institutional aid that I've been talking about, so colleges and universities themselves may have their own funding that they would award to students. Again, may or may not be merit or need-based. You may see a combination of the two at schools, but that's, again, something to look into at each of the schools to see what kind of programs, financial aid programs are available, what do they have, and we'll talk about some resources that each school has that can give you an idea of, what each school may have available. Other agencies, so this is considered kind of outside scholarships. Often with incoming students, we see that a lot of students, if they have outside scholarships, they may be coming from their town, so they may have won them through the high school. A lot of times the guidance office has information about any local scholarships that may be available. These might be from, say, an Elks Club, Lions Club, or other programs that have been put together in the town. Additionally, there are scholarships that students win that are more kind of national scholarships. People often ask, how do you search for that? There is a website called fastweb.com. It kind of replaces, many years ago you could go to the library and search through these books that would have, scholarship opportunities in them. A student builds a profile about themselves, and then the FastWeb does the work of kind of searching through these various thousands of scholarships to see, does the student in the profile that they've built, do they meet any of the criteria to be able to just apply for that scholarship? What I do hear, the feedback from some students is it can be overwhelming, because if the criteria to apply for the scholarship is, that you have to be a girl and, say, live in Massachusetts, or something very basic, that you can get a lot of these, potential things to apply to. And is it really worth the work then? Because often you may have to write an essay or fill out an application and all that. What I'm going to do is just kind of stop right there on that conversation, because it will, I can answer that question better and show you, when we actually look at some sample financial aid awards, how it can be worth the work, to put some time into applying for some outside scholarships. So this is a very general slide, high-level overview of financial aid. The College Board, which has the SATs, they also have a form called the Profile Form, which institutions use, so a student may or may not have to fill that out to apply for financial aid at a school. But they do this Trends in Student Aid. This is the most recent one, although it's from 13-14, but just giving an overview of this, what sounds like such a large number, the $184.5 billion that was given out in financial aid in that year. 34% of that was student loans. Institutional and grants and scholarships, about 21%. Often the word grant goes with need-based, and scholarships often is kind of merit-based. That's not always the case, but I kind of like to point that out because it seems as if they're two separate things. It is all just free money. Federal grants making up about 25%, and then we talked about the tax credits, some state grants. As you can see, those are kind of the smaller amounts there, but just a very general high-level look. So the application process, we've been talking about, I've been just referencing this FAFSA form. It's the free application for federal student aid. So I always like to first start out saying that word free. There is a website FAFSA, the official FAFSA site is fafsa.ed.gov. There is a FAFSA.com site that actually charges families. The last time I looked, it was about $75. And I do remember years ago having someone in a presentation say, are you sure it's free? Because I started filling it out and I had to put a credit card in it. If you're being asked, to pay to fill out the FAFSA form, you're at the wrong site. It is a free form to fill out. And there is, and it's not on there, I'm just kind of looking. There is actually, if you are looking for help in filling out that form, there's something called FAFSA Day all across the state of Massachusetts, different locations where within high schools, we have volunteers who sit at computer workstations with you. So whether or not you've started to fill it out and you have one question, or you haven't started filling it out at all, that's something that is available to families that is free help in filling out that FAFSA form. I wanted to kind of point that out.
And there is a flyer in the back. There's going to be one January 30th. I believe it's in Salem. So feel free to grab one on the way out if you're interested in that.
Great, thanks. So this is required by all colleges in order to apply for any federal and state aid. Someone once asked me, well, if I don't want to apply for federal aid but want to apply for institutional aid only, would I still need to fill it out? I know at our school, the application process is the application process no matter what you're applying for. So I would assume that most schools, most people are going to be filling this form out. This will be the last year that you cannot fill it out. If the student is a senior this year, you can't fill it out until after January 1st, 2016. And it's going to be asking about your income from 2015. So right there, you're already starting off at a stressful point, because usually colleges want this by, say, early February, where you may not have gotten your W-2 for 2015 until the end of January. So a couple of things that I want to point out, and hopefully I'll say these multiple times in the presentation and make sure you remember this, is absolutely, absolutely use estimates in your income if it means meeting the deadline of the school. There are some schools that if you miss that deadline, then that may mean that there's no aid, grant aid available, or it may mean a cut down in the aid that's available to you because they have a limited pot of money and they strictly go by that deadline. I know at our school we will go, if someone gets information into us late, we're overly accommodating to that, but not all schools are that way. So absolutely use estimates. You can use your prior year tax return. You can use your last pay stub or your W-2 if you have it, and try to come up with something, but or just use your prior year tax return if it's somewhat comparable to what it's going to be, and then you can update it later. But you want to make sure that you're hitting that deadline and get that information in. Yeah.
So my brother's in college now, and my parents have gone through filling out the FAFSA stuff before. Could they use the same account for both children, or just one account?
Sure, good question. So let's say you as the parent already have a child in school and have filled out a FAFSA before. Can you kind of use that same information? So in filling out a FAFSA form, one parent has to have what's called an FSA ID. It used to be a PIN number. That's kind of your login, that's your account. And then each student needs to have their own information. So the parents can reuse their same information to fill out and to sign the FAFSA, but you as the new student need to get your own information. And so that's that third bullet point there. You log in with your FSA ID. This is really just, similar to any website that you go on to. It's a secure username and password. It is used to sign the FAFSA form. Additionally, if you end up borrowing money, either as a parent through the federal loan program or a student through the student loan program, you're going to use that as your online signature as well. That's something that you can sign up for now and have that out of the way should you want to kind of get something going. But again, the FAFSA, you cannot begin to fill it out until after January 1st. You can print up a FAFSA on the web worksheet if you go to the FAFSA website. So if you wanted to print up something, I'm someone who, I'm sure this is shocking, someone who studied accounting and works in financial aid. I like checklists and I like, filling something out ahead of time, but sometimes I find it easier if you have that worksheet and you kind of fill out all the information because you're working with, your tax return, a pay stub, maybe a bank statement, and have it all aligned, and then sit down at the computer, log in, and you feel like you have something to go by as the questions come along, and you're not kind of, stuck trying to figure out an answer to a question. Obviously, you do whatever, is comfortable for you, and not everyone works the same way, but that's my suggestion of something that you can do. If anyone happens to be, sometimes we'll have parents of juniors who attend these seminars, so I just wanted to point out the president back in October made a pretty big announcement that starting with the 17-18 school year, so students who are juniors now who will be applying next year, they're changing the FAFSA, and so rather than using what's called prior year income, so right now it's at 2015, they're going to use prior year income, and they're going to open up the FAFSA on October 1st for families to fill out. That should make it a lot easier, particularly in this first year in applying for aid, for families to be able to already have that information. They had already, so basically for seniors right now, you'll be for 2 years using the same income, which will be 2015 income. The last presentation I did, people were asking me all kinds of questions. Well, I was gonna, what if something changes? I was gonna retire, then it's gonna be a bump up in income, all this stuff. You always have the option to talk to the financial aid office. So if you have any sort of unusual circumstance, a one-time income stream that kind of doesn't fit with the other years that you're going to be filling out, you can talk to them. They could possibly make an adjustment to your information after the fact. So if you have some sort of special circumstance that sets you apart, because you can't highlight that on the FAFSA form, it's just asking for data points, that is how you kind of go about that, is talk to the financial aid office themselves and explain that and see, they may want you to put it in writing, they may, take a review, they may look at that and make changes, they may not. Certainly it's not, we're putting in a swimming pool that's, costing $30,000. That's not something, obviously, that they would look at, but there certainly are, things that happen within families that we kind of have the authority to make a professional judgment on that. This IRS data retrieval tool is actually a great resource. Of course, it's not available until after February 1st. So what that is when you're filling out the FAFSA and you get to the questions about income, the first question is going to be along the lines of, what is your tax filing status? If you answer have filed, it will say, a screen will pop up and say, do you want to basically pop over to the IRS site and review your data for 2015 and then upload it right into the FAFSA? So it will take the information that the FAFSA is looking for, AGI, taxes paid, any other questions like untaxed income that would come right off of your tax return, and they can upload it for you. Why that is a benefit, it's easier. Also, as an institution, we are required, students or families are randomly selected through filling out the FAFSA to have their information verified, which means that as schools, we used to have to collect copies of tax returns after the fact and a verification worksheet and supplemental documentation. We've seen a decrease in that for families using that IRS data retrieval tool. Again, it's hard in that first year in applying because of the timeline, but you can always go back into the FAFSA and you can make corrections. So if you fill it out, say on January 31st, and let's say you used estimates, usually once you file your taxes, it's about a 2-week span before you can use the data retrieval, but you can go back in and you can go to that question and you can actually use that data retrieval tool and upload that. Additionally, if you are selected for verification, basically we're no longer allowed to collect paper tax returns. So you either have to use a data retrieval tool or you can request a free copy of your tax return transcript. So that's something you might see or hear from a school that you might have to provide. So it does have to be completed each and every year. And again, it is free. The website is, it used to be FAFSA.ed.gov. You can still get to it from that, but it is just FAFSA.gov, gets you right there, and it's not .com. And I think the next slide talks about what's on the FAFSA. So you're going to put information for the schools that your son or daughter is applying to, or your son or daughter is actually putting that information in. The nice thing is, being online, you can actually search for the school, so you don't have to know the federal school code that it's looking for, so that it sends that information to the schools. You can put up to 10 schools on the FAFSA and have them receive that information. I have had students say, oh, I'm applying to more than 10 schools, what do I do? If that is the case, myself, what I would do is go by deadlines and make sure, your earliest deadline schools are on there. Typically, it takes about 2 days for a school to get the information, unless there is a holdup in, sometimes we see that, maybe a parent didn't sign the FAFSA. They'll hold on to that for a bit before they send it on. But you just want to make sure that the school gets the information, so you could call them and just check with them before you remove a school, so you can go back in, remove a school, and add a school on. And then at the end of the day, you just want to make sure the school that obviously you're attending, or your son or daughter is attending, is still listed there on the FAFSA form. It's going to ask for parent and student data. It starts off, asking about you, and it's you, the student. So it starts off asking about demographic data about the student, and then income and asset information about the student, and then into parent. And who is considered a parent? They've made changes over the past couple of years. So parents who are married, and that would include same-sex parents, both put their information on the FAFSA form. Parents who live together, whether or not they are married, put their information on the form. That's a change over the past couple of years. In the case of divorced or separated parents that are not living together, it's just the custodial parent that fills out the FAFSA form. The non-custodial parent information does not get put on that form at all. As I already talked about, the income is going to be from 2015 if the student's a senior this year. And then as far as asset information, it includes savings, checking, investments, other property, so not your primary home residence equity, but if you own, say, a second property, that equity in that home would get included as an asset. What you do not include is your primary home, the value of your retirement accounts, life insurance, and if you own a business solely, like as a family, and it has less than 100 employees, you don't put the value of that business either. So those are all excluded. I also like to just point out that the assets, so the retirement value is not included, but as far as in income, untaxed income, any contributions that you put into your retirement account in that year 2015, so maybe it shows up on your W-2, an amount that went into a 401k or 403b, that does get included as income, but the total value of your retirement account does not get put into the formula. And you're also going to put in information about the number in your household and the number in college. That helps determine an allowance for maintenance of a household, as well as in determining, because this form at the end of the day is going to kind of spit out this number that's called an EFC, the estimated family contribution, that helps determine eligibility for aid. If there are more than one student in college, that number would be, if it's 2 in college, it's kind of cut in half. It's 3 in college, it's in thirds. So that's where those kind of come into play. So other financial aid applications. First, are there any other questions on the FAFSA form? Okay, so other aid applications, and I was referencing that the CSS Profile Form, so not everyone is going to have to fill this form out. Institutions that may have their own money to award often will have you fill this out. Some schools will actually only have you fill it out in the first year because this form is available as of October 1st to be filled out. So they may only ask for it in 1 year, and who knows if that will change next year. But many institutions that have their own funds to award are going to ask you to fill this form out. So again, being this checklist person, what I would do is, have this nice little checklist for each school. What forms are they going to be requesting? What are the deadlines? And so that when I have done those, that I can kind of check those off and know that everything kind of has been set and gotten in to the school. This is not a free form to fill out, though at the beginning of filling out the form online, it will ask a series of questions to determine whether or not you qualify for a waiver of the cost. It is $25 for the first school and $16 for each additional school that it gets sent to. The website there, student.collegeboard.org/profile. That information is in this little pamphlet here. Different from the FAFSA form, the profile form itself is filled out. In the case of a divorced or separated family, it's filled out by the custodial parent, but they have a separate form called the non-custodial profile form. And that would get sent to the non-custodial parent, and they would have to fill out that with their information. They have a webinar recording, MIFA does, on filling out the profile. So that's a resource there. The profile form I find to be a lot more involved than the FAFSA form. So if you have to fill that out, that may actually be helpful to you. They also, because it's one that you can fill out earlier, it will give you a printout of the information that you then would need to fill out on the FAFSA form. So there's a small benefit to filling out that form there. And as I had said in the beginning, and I would say over and over again, that deadlines are important, and make sure that you're meeting those, so that you're not losing out on any financial aid that might be available to you or to your son or daughter. So after you fill out these forms, the schools get that information, they process it. The state also, so as long as you answer the question, what is your state of residence, and you put Massachusetts, the state is going to get that information. It's really difficult now, when it was a paper form, it was easier to kind of make mistakes potentially, but where it is that online form and there's built-in edits, you're not going to be able to kind of move on from the application without answering a question, and if something doesn't seem like it's correct, it will prompt you like, that doesn't seem like the correct, answer. Are you sure that is correct? So that is a nice benefit of, an electronic form. You will receive electronically or by mail. I mean, there is a paper FAFSA form that you can get, but I haven't seen one in years. But the student will get this student aid report, and as long as a parent has put their email address on the form as well, which it asks for, and that's an optional field, that you would get as a parent the student aid report as well. That's a complete summary of all of the information that was filed on the FAFSA form. Additionally, it's going to tell you if there's any follow-up that you may need to do. So I talked about being selected for verification. It would tell you on that form whether or not you were selected for verification, and it would tell you that you need to follow up with the school, or the school will follow up with you on that. It would tell you if there is anything else of the various checks that happen in submitting your FAFSA form that you might need to follow up on. For instance, often we'll have through the Social Security Administration that they couldn't confirm that someone was a U.S. citizen. A student would just need to get to us a copy of a passport or something like that that would prove that. Additionally, what are the other things? The selective service, a student who's over 18 has to be registered with selective service, can't be in default on loans, things like that. It does various checks. So it would tell you if anything needed to be followed up on. And the school gets that information as well. They would be in touch with you as well. With the profile form, you get an acknowledgement report, and again, very similar, except there are no checks, there is no verification process, but it is just a printout of everything that was filled out on that form, and also kind of confirming which schools received that data, where it was sent. I talked about verification. It varies at schools. I know some schools will not award aid until verification is complete. And at our school, we actually do that kind of later on in the year as the fall happens. Then we request documents for verification and just verify data. So each school may be different in that. But whenever they send you information and contact you about that, make sure you get that data into them as soon as you can. And then colleges are going to review applications, and they'll determine your financial aid and then send you a financial aid award. Oftentimes it comes with the acceptance, but maybe it does not at some schools. Also will depend if they have all their data to be able to make a determination, but a school should be in touch with you if they don't have that. So now we're going to look a little bit at how financial aid decisions are made. It's a very basic formula. You take the cost of attendance at a school, subtract out this EFC, the estimated family contribution, and that gives the figure which is a student's financial aid eligibility, or need, it's often referred to as well. So colleges will then fill in that need or financial aid eligibility with financial aid from a variety of sources. So the cost of attendance is the figure that typically you'll see on any financial aid literature, on their website, on the admissions website. It is not just the billed costs that you'll see, when that semester bill comes, but it also gives you unbilled costs. It gives you estimates so that you have a more realistic idea what 1 year of school will cost. So it includes the tuition and fees that are billed, room and board that typically is billed at least in that first year. It's like if you're living off campus, obviously it's not billed. But then transportation, travel, personal expenses, books and supplies. There'll be estimates typically for those that are in that cost of attendance. Then the expected family contribution. It's a calculated figure. As I said, when you fill out the FAFSA form on that student aid report, the acknowledgement report, you will see what that EFC number is. And this first bullet is kind of a good way to look at is that a family's ability to absorb 1 year of college expenses, not necessarily that you can pay that. A lot of times people might see it and think, oh, how could I possibly pay that right now, like in cash? But it's their ability to absorb, and again, in 1 year of college expenses. Again, with that whole standardized formula in that first, one of the first slides and the bullet point I pulled out. So same federal formula used for every family, excuse me. But institutions may use a different figure. So an example is on our award letter, we have what we've determined as a family's EFC, their estimated family contribution, and it varies from what the federal government said. The way we say, typically we're more generous in our formula. But I just like to point that out because you may be looking at a variety of financial aid awards from schools, and you may see a different EFC. If a school is just using and just requiring that FAFSA form, those schools would have the exact same EFC on there. But institutions using their, awarding their own funds, you may see a different estimated family contribution in there. But again, the schools, in order to award federal aid, must go by that federal formula in order to award that federal aid. the premise with financial aid is the family has the primary responsibility for paying, and financial aid is there to help meet that need and that financial aid eligibility level. And that the EFC is not necessarily what the family will pay. And so we'll look at that and talk about that last bullet point when we look at some sample financial aid awards that are coming up. There are some EFC calculators that you can go to if you want to try to go through the process and see what that might be. I would also point out that it is mandated through federal law by all schools must have something that's called a net price calculator on their website at their school. So you can go on, fill out some information. Each one of them is slightly different, but it gives you an idea of the net price that you would pay. So that is cost minus grant aid. So like kind of average net price that students pay at that school. So that's another way to gather information and help you in looking and comparing schools. So I just talked about this slide, forgot that it was coming right behind the other one. So we're just going to skip right over that. The next two slides are talking about asset impact on EFC and then income impact on EFC. And really, what these two slides point out is just the fact that this is an income-driven formula. And so this just highlights that. So here in this example, it's a family of 4. There's 1 child in college, 3 different families, and they all have the same income but varying assets. And you can see that the difference in the EFC is really not that great compared to the difference in those assets. Particularly when you look at the next slide and you look at the income impact. So with this same 3 different families, but they all have the same amount of assets and varying levels of income, it's a greater difference in that EFC simply because the income is what drives that, that federal formula much more than assets do. So how the formula works, this is 3 different colleges. This presentation is the same presentation that is used, throughout the state of Massachusetts. Sometimes people complain about the figures that are used, but this kind of makes it easy for doing it at all different high schools. So it's the same EFC at all of these schools, but the eligibility for aid obviously varies because each school has a different cost here. So you have a high cost $60,000 school, college A, so some sort of private institution, down to college D that the cost is $5,000, so there's no eligibility for aid because the EFC is $5,000. What I like to point out in this slide and talk about is not to simply rule out a school just because the cost is $60,000 and you have a $5,000 EFC. So don't rule out a school just because of cost. Look into what they may have available for aid. That high-cost school may have a very generous aid program and may be more affordable than College B. Not saying it happens every time, but absolutely, don't just look at a school and think, it's not going to happen because the cost is high. So do that bit of research into each school to see what kind of aid they have available. Call the financial aid office at the schools, and I'd like to point out with this slide. Oh, this is my favorite slide. This is the one slide they never change. And so this is a sample financial aid award, and we have this college that has a $40,000 cost of attendance. You will never see a barrel on any financial aid award from any school that I know of, but I think it just that it works for the presentation and explaining things, and that's why I always say, oh, this slide, they never change it. But first goes into the barrel is that family's EFC, so that $5,000. Then the student is awarded a scholarship of $9,500, a grant of $13,500. So again, that's all free money, both of those. But it might be that one was need-based aid and one is some sort of merit scholarship. They've been given a student loan of $5,500. That's not a random amount. I'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about loans. And then work study ceiling that they could earn up to $3,500. Now, if you add all of that up, it does not equal the $40,000. So there's unmet need of $3,000. And so what that means now for this family is the cost potentially is that EFC of $5,000 plus the $3,000 of unmet need. Now you have a cost of attendance that has some estimates built in there, so it doesn't necessarily mean it's exactly $8,000, but it may be fairly close to that. So this is the point where I kind of go back to that beginning, one of the beginning slides where we talked about outside scholarships, and is it really worth the work of combing through and applying to all of these scholarships? Often I hear from families who the student is dead set on this one institution, it's here or nowhere else. And there may be a large gap, and so how do you make it work? And outside scholarships can do that because they can go, there's been a ton of work in the 20 years that I've been working in financial aid to ensure that schools, that institutions themselves allow outside scholarships to go to reducing unmet need. It used to be years ago that it might reduce grant aid at the school, but I would say that most schools are good about that goes right towards reducing that unmet need. After that, because there are federal rules that you have to follow, you can't award above financial eligibility. So then it would reduce, say, a student loan component or a work component. But if a student got a $2,000 scholarship or a couple of $1,000 scholarships and it took away some of that unmet need, then it becomes more reasonable that they might be able to attend that school. This is also the point and this is where I think it's nice that there are students here. This is my own personal, again, throwing this out to families that obviously for each family it's different, but I would say, and I know that I have two girls that are 6th grade and 4th grade, but I've talked to them now, and I will talk to them then about looking at what the cost is, not wanting them to be overburdened with student loans, but having conversations now potentially as far as what might be realistic or not for school cost. Easier than having it when all of the excitement, of trying to decide the school, later in the spring. Again, obviously up to your own family and how you deal with things. That's just, a suggestion to do that. So that's outside scholarships, how they can be worth the work. The one other thing I would say is a lot of times scholarships may be for 1 year. And it's so much is just put into this 1 year of school that it is, 2-4 years of school, graduate school as well. You're talking about even more. And so to keep that in mind as well. So if there's unmet need and there's an outside scholarship, is that just a one-time thing? What is the plan going forward as far as, making things, work? There is also a website. Another thing that the government did was created a website called the College Navigator, where you can go on, you can search for a school. It's actually very nice because when you go in and search for it, it comes back with very simple information for you, and it's telling you about average loan debt of students leaving that school and net price of a school, and there's a little bit more information that comes out, but it's not this big snapshot of overwhelming information that you can't quite process. So that's also a nice resource in doing research on schools and looking at cost. That's something that you can look at as well. So this slide is looking at how awards can vary. We have two different slides here. For ease of example, it's the same cost of attendance at all these schools, the same EFC, and so that eligibility is the same, the $35,000. In this slide, we have college A, B, and C. They're all awarding some sort of grants, loans, and work study. But just that bottom line, the total aid that is awarded to the student, and really it's a difference in grant aid, is different. It could be that at that college C, the student actually missed the deadline of submitting that FAFSA form, and so they took a cut in that grant. Or it could be that that school has a limited pot of money, they have to stretch it over, a large student body, and so that's how it works. And so there is unmet need. So you may see a variety in awards that come in. It's not just standard. In this example, again, same data for cost of attendance, EFC, eligibility. And this one I don't like when schools do this because it doesn't seem right to me. But you have 3 different schools and the same total aid on the bottom line. So if you're just looking at the bottom, oh, it's all the same. But look at College C that is awarding no grant aid at all, and they have put in a line item, well, both B and C, of a parent loan. This goes actually both for student loans and parent loans. Nothing that is in an award letter do you have to accept. Additionally, with a parent loan, there's more to receiving a federal parent loan than just having it show on your award letter. Very different from a student loan where the FAFSA is your only application for that loan. With the Federal Plus loan, which is what is in this example, you fill out the FAFSA, but then there's a loan application as well. And so, any parent typically is eligible for that loan unless, they are denied the loan, which, could be a credit reason, but you can always get a cosign or things like that. But there's more to that there. So just look at all of the components that are in these award letters and not just at the bottom line there. But again, I also just kind of stress, this $5,500 student loan amount that I said is not a random amount. That is the maximum federal direct student loan that a first-year student can receive. But of that $5,500 amount, only $3,500 of it, if the student is eligible for aid. That means as long as the EFC is not greater than the cost of attendance, the student is eligible for the subsidized loan, but only $3,500 of that $5,500 can be subsidized. The additional $2,000 would be an unsubsidized loan. Unsubsidized meaning that the interest actually is accruing from the time of disbursement. A student or family could pay that interest as it accrues quarterly, or they can tack it onto the loan, which costs more, but you wait and pay that off when you start paying off your loans. So students always have the option to say, actually, I'm only going to take the $5,500 and not the $2,000, or I want a lesser amount, or whatever works for your own family. But that $5,500 is the max. $3,500 of it is a subsidized. Different than here in this example, what you should always see on an award letter from a school is a line item that says direct subsidized loan with an amount, and then direct unsubsidized loan. So it should be listed out there, not just as one lump sum amount. So now moving on to paying for college. So filling the EFC and unmet need. Excuse me. So this is just an example. With any large purchase, home, car, it's not many people just walk up like, okay, here's my cash to pay that amount. You may be using multiple streams of income, savings. So maybe it's past income. So maybe the student has some savings and summer earnings. A lot of times schools will have part of that EFC is a kind of a student summer savings contribution, and maybe some parent savings. Maybe there's like a 529 plan or college savings plan that you can use some of that. Present income. The nice thing is that most schools, if they don't have one in-house, they have payment plans that you can access. So rather than paying once in the fall and once in the spring, you pay, it might be a $35 fee to have a payment plan, and so you're paying monthly during the semester, which is a nice way to break that up. And maybe future income. So maybe some sort of you can borrow, so that federal plus parent loan to cover the EFC or any unmet need. Also, there are private education loans. Sometimes I've had parents who want the student to borrow the parent contribution. Again, this is my own, soapbox of just saying, make sure if you're going to any sort of loan, whatever it is, look at the details, compare to other loans, talk to people, talk to the financial aid office. Do they have information about loans other than, say, the federal loan that is available? And look at what those costs are, what the monthly payment is. What is that monthly payment actually going to be? If a student takes on a loan, what is it going to be, when they graduate and go into repayment? What is their job going to be? What are they thinking they might do? And what is that average salary? That's something also to think of as well. And also, it doesn't have to be, just coming from one of these. You can, mix things up. Sometimes I know in the Federal Plus application process, there's just a little click box that says, do you want to just borrow the whole EFC? And oftentimes, we've had parents that just kind of click it, and then we get in touch with them, and it's like, well, this is actually going to create a credit, or do you really want, that full amount? And sometimes it's just, you kind of go along and go with it. So think about, how you want to make it work. I know that MIFA has calculators that you can work on, okay, if this amount can come out of my current income, I know I need to borrow some, but I don't want to borrow the whole thing, to help you figure that out. So the federal direct student loan that I was talking about, there is no credit check on it. You just fill out the FAFSA form. This is that student loan, that 35, max 55 first year. Then it goes up to 45, max subsidized 55 for junior, senior year. It has a fixed interest rate for each year. But the way it works is, so right now for this current year, it's a 4.29% fixed interest rate once the student is actually accruing interest on that loan. Every year on July 1st, there's a new interest rate that's calculated. It's calculated based on a T-bill plus X. Last year it was just a little bit higher than the 4.29. So, as it gets closer to that July 1st, they'll put out what that interest rate is. And then for that year, for whatever amount the student borrows, that portion of the loan is that interest rate, and it's fixed for the life of the loan. There are, and it's capped. It could never possibly in a year go above 8.25%. But again, someone who borrowed this loan in this year, that interest rate will never change unless they consolidate their loans, and that's something for a whole nother presentation. And so then repayment, as I said, no payments are due while a student is enrolled. That also includes summer. If the student is off for the summer, that loans do not go into repayment, while you're on break for the summer. And this is kind of gives you a good idea. So the $27,000 debt is kind of the average in the United States of a student leaving college, and that is the repayment is typically a 10-year repayment, and that would be about $300 a month to repay that loan. One benefit with federal loans is that they have a whole host of repayment benefits and options available to students, so that you can help to manage your payments. There's the deferment option when in graduate school. There are forbearance options, so if someone doesn't qualify for a deferment, but they're having some sort of financial hardship, there are ways that you can either decrease the monthly payment or reduce it, for a period of time, or have no payment for a period of time, as well as multiple repayment plans that can extend the time frame, up to 25 years. Obviously, you pay more on that loan, but you can go back and forth, and so that there are just definitely options available. All right, moving on to free resources, and then we'll be done with the presentation. I already did talk about FAFSA Day, so this is free assistance in filling out the FAFSA. As I said, you can even just show up. We always have, I help at a site in Wakefield, at the tech school in Wakefield, and that's on a Wednesday night, January 27th. It used to always be on the last Sunday of the month, and many locations are on that Sunday, but now they've opened up, and different locations have other nights available as well, which is really nice. So yes, Salem is probably the closest one here, but there are other locations if that date doesn't work for you. FAFSAday.org is where you can go in and actually search for those sites. Again, computer stations available, so you can sit right down, fill out your FAFSA form, have people walking around, you raise your hand and say, yeah, I need some help, or whatever. The Educational Opportunity Center there's a website there. They have free financial aid help. I believe also in the basement of the Boston Public Library, there's a center there. The IRS has free tax preparation centers, so that's something to look into as well. Also, MIFA, actually, at the end of the presentation, there is a very small evaluation form. And on here at the top, you can sign up to receive MIFA emails. I've signed up for them in the past because I wanted to make sure if I'm telling people to sign up for them that that was good information. And the reason that I've been volunteering with MIFA for 14 years is I know the people there. They do good work. They're very helpful. So they will send you emails January through, I believe, May. Timely information, reminding you to fill out the FAFSA, reminding that that at this time you should be doing this. Additionally, they will put out information through that email service about this paying the bill college seminars that they'll have. So another resource available to you. So once you kind of have these financial aid awards, you've decided, and everything that I've told you has now left your mind, and you have more specific questions, you can attend that seminar. So that's a great resource that's available to you. And so what you can do now, as I've said all along, research, maybe make up a checklist, maybe don't if you don't like checklists, but just kind of go through and do that research and look into what's available at each school, what forms are required at each school, and what deadlines are for each school, because they quite possibly will vary at every school. Talk to your child about paying for college. Use those net price calculators in doing your research, and also that Navigator site. And then sign up for the MIFA emails, and you can also sign up for that FSA ID for when you do fill out the FAFSA form. All right, so I didn't put my name into this slide, but so if you can fill out those evaluation forms and then you can leave them at the back. MIFA really uses these to make sure that every year when we do this presentation that it's the best information is delivered to you. So I'd appreciate you filling that out. Are there any lingering, general questions that people have? My name is Amy Staffier, if you can put that on the presentation. It's AMY and then STAFFIER. Is there a question up in the back?
Just curious, previous slides, they said that right now the average debt is $27,000. How recent is that number? I can't imagine that the average student debt because of your college.
It's very recent, but so you're thinking that's a very,
Is that not including the parent loan?
that is just a student loan debt.
That's per year total.
That's total for 4 years. That's average. And so again, what I would say to you is to look at, if you go to that College Navigator site, and again, it doesn't go into parent debt. It's just looking at federal, typically, debt as well. So if students borrow private loans, I'm not sure that it's included in there, but on that Navigator site, it will list for each school what their average debt for their student is coming out. But across the country, that is the average debt for students. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so as far as retirement, the value of your retirement plan is not included on the FAFSA form at all. It's only if you made a contribution from income into the, that is listed as income. It will specifically ask you on the FAFSA, you know, did you put an amount in? It would show up on your W-2 form. It will actually give you the line number on a W-2, or if you're self-employed on the tax return itself. But the value is not included on the FAFSA. Yeah. Did you have a question?
I did. Yeah. So an early decision, students should be hearing in December, but none of this is even available till January. So what happens then?
Right, so early decision, the question is if someone's applying early. Typically, like I know at our school, we may have them give us the profile form, and we give them an estimate. And it wouldn't necessarily be a final award, but some schools may. And so then typically you'd be giving final information, you know, later on that aligns with the regular action deadline. Yeah. Sure.
So when you go and fill out this form, and now does that automatically, is it gonna like automatically tell you about the different, how do I want to this?
Like
a
aid?
grant and the Pell
No,
it's all different.
you get it from the school itself. Yeah. So the question was about when you fill out the form, do you get to see anything? It's it's kind of anticlimactic. You fill out this form and then it's, okay, it's submitted. You wait and you get that information from the school. You don't have any information right then after filling it out.
From the school gets the information, they'll contact you and say, okay, you're eligible for the program.
Actually, you know what? When you fill out the FAFSA form and you get the student aid report back, which is that confirmation of all the details that you filled out, one of the items on there, if it seems like you're eligible for a Pell Grant, it will tell you, it looks like you may be eligible for a Pell Grant. Your school will determine if you are and what the amount is.
And so the school will let us know.
And the school will then let you know. Yep.
So everything will be.
It's all a waiting game. Yep, exactly, and it comes from the school. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so if it's due, if the financial aid deadline is February 1st, absolutely use your 2014 tax return. You can just use that. The only thing that I would caution in using just your 2014 tax return as an estimate is if your 2015 is going to be drastically different, you may want to use your last pay stub and kind of try to come up with a more realistic AGI figure in tax. And again, someone can help you at FAFSA Day to help determine that. If it's not that different, then it's not going to make a difference. And so go ahead. Estimate, absolutely, in order to meet that deadline, because you can always, but all I always just caution is try to use a realistic estimate. So if like 2014 is off by, you know, $20,000 from what 2015 is, you know, try to use something that's going to be a little more realistic. Otherwise, you're going to get possibly a change in an award later. So you want to be able to have that data. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Now, on the form, you have to designate what college you want that form to be submitted to.
Yeah.
What if by October 1st, your child hasn't decided which college is?
Sure. So this is a question, parent of a junior. You're going to be able to fill out the FAFSA as early as October 1st. Doesn't mean you have to. We have no idea what's going to go on within our community as far as going to this prior year income and having the earlier deadline for 17-18. Colleges themselves haven't decided whether or not they're going to be bumping up their deadlines to be earlier. So it may still be that you have time to have decisions made. So nothing's been set in stone yet, so I can't fully say. I can't imagine that colleges would bump up their financial aid deadline as early as, October. So you still should have time to be able to figure out where they want to go. And you can always fill out the FAFSA with one school and go back in and add a school. That's always an option as well. And for that, if you're the parent of a junior, you're going to be using 2015 income to populate that FAFSA form. Yep. Yeah.
The federal students' direct loans, you see the ones that are subsidized and unsubsidized. Is there a website that you can go on and find your students' loans? Because I have an older child.
Yep.
Okay, and I don't remember. I know we filled it out for the FAFSA and stuff to get these loans.
Yeah.
But is it possible to pay a little bit early on the unsubsidized?
Absolutely.
How would I find your account?
Yeah. So the question is, if a student has loans, federal loans, where can you find that information? There's a website called NSLDS, National Loan Data System, .ed.gov. On there, the student can go in and they can search for their information about their loans, who their servicer is, and then you can find out where to make payments. You can absolutely make payments not only to interest, but you can also make payments to principal on any loan at any time, and there's no penalties or fees for doing so. NSLDS. It might be just .gov. But if you look up National Student Loan Data System, yeah.
When you have twins, are you filling out two forms? And are they getting two different IDs?
Yep, so if you have twins, yes. Unfortunately, you have to fill out two forms. You just have your own FSA ID that you can sign that is the same, but you have to fill out that information twice for the two students because they'll have their own ID number. Yeah. Yeah.
On those days that you said you're open to help us fill out the FAFSA, other than our tax information, what should we bring with us?
If you're going to FAFSA Day, so it asks about asset information, so you might want to bring a bank statement. It's as of the day you're filling out the form, or information about any other assets that you have. So that's really the information. Also, just make sure, because sometimes this happens, that you, if there's one piece of information you get correct on the FAFSA, it's the student social security number. So if it's a number that hasn't been memorized, write that down and bring that with you, because that gets put in as well, and it gets attached to the form. And if it's entered wrong, which, believe it or not, happens more often than I would like it to happen, it's hard to go in and correct that information. So that's one other piece of information that you need. But it's mostly income and asset information, student and parent. Yeah.
Lumped in with regular assets? Do they account special?
That gets lumped in as regular assets, but it's the asset of the parent, and so, which is a good thing because it's typically about 5% after allowances of parent assets, where students, it's about 25% of student assets that go toward that EFC number. So, yeah. Yeah.
If you have two separate 529 plans, one for a younger child and one is for a college, can you not count the younger one?
Technically, it's all assets go on, so whether or not it's for a different child. So the question was about a 529 plan, and so if you had multiple 529 plans for multiple children, can you not include the asset for, for the other students? And my answer was no. You're supposed to be reporting all assets that that you have, whether or not it's designated for a different child. It all gets included on that FAFSA form. Yeah.
Is there a minimum amount from the bank account which is protected when you make the application?
Sure. So this question was, is there an amount that is protected as far as assets are concerned? In the formula itself, both for income and for assets, there are allowances against income and assets so that it brings down that amount. So it's not, when I said 5%, it's not of that your total assets. There are allowances against that, you know, for dependent on your age, assets and things, and then for income, you know, like taxes paid, maintenance of a household. So there are allowances to bring down those amounts. So it's not, so there is some sort of protection. It's not a set amount. It's individual to a family, to age, to family size, and things like that. All right, so if there are any questions that you didn't want to ask in the group, I will still hang around. I will turn the microphone off, but thank you for all coming.